I live and work in these communities every day, and I see how new immigrants are welcome in these communities. Mm-hmm. They're running businesses, they're vital workforce, and the public opinion polling shows as well. Both on the more positive side, there's been for a long time, strong bipartisan support for positive immigration reform in this country.
Hello, one and all, and welcome back to The Rural Impact. I'm Michelle Rathman, and we are so grateful that you've joined us for another conversation that does work hard to connect the dots between policy and rural everything. Now, if you are joining us on YouTube, you will note that I am not in the studio today because I'm actually in Washington, D.C. I promise we are going to take the show on the road, and we will be recording from a few policy conferences and more on that to come in the next couple of weeks. But a quick reminder for our return listeners and for our new friends, please be sure to visit theruralimpact.com, and that's where you can, in just less than 2 seconds, become a subscriber. It's free, of course, and when you do, you'll receive the extras in your inbox, recaps of our shows, the resources that we share, and details of what we've got coming up next. And we've got a lot coming at you in the next weeks and months ahead. Also, as it happens, it is the place where you will find our merch like totes, hats, t-shirts, and other fun stylish gear. And that also helps to support our work. So check it out, consider making a purchase and helping us continue having these dot connecting, candid conversations about how policy is lifting up or letting down rural people in rural communities across the U.S. and small towns. I want to make sure that I include that. So, okay, on the subject of candid conversations, you may agree after listening to today's episode that it really does fit the bill because I'm going to say it up front. It is not a light subject, to be sure. And my hope, I really do mean that, is that by the time our time together is over today, what you've heard in the show in some way, shape, or form enlightens you. Now, if you are a subscriber or a longtime listener, or if you know me, thanks again for that if you are a subscriber. But you know that I have shared in the past that I am a proud native Minnesotan. My grandparents were farmers. My father was a farmer with his siblings. And many, many, many of my aunts and uncles and cousins still live there. When my sisters and I were young, we were relocated to Illinois with our parents. But again, it's where Minnesota was where I spent most of my summers, the better part of my childhood. That's a subject for another day and another place. But I continue to be so blessed beyond measure to have aunts, uncles, and cousins, and several friends living in Minnesota, many of them in rural places across the state. And they have a front row seat bearing witness to the surge in violent immigration enforcement activities. And from those I've been in contact with, there and across the U.S., they're horrified, angry, and honestly in disbelief at the level of disruption in lives and livelihoods. Rural has not been spared. You may be wondering why I am talking about this today, why we are having this conversation on the Rural Impact. And the reason is simply put, because it is policy that brought this to Minnesota, to Illinois, Maine, so many other states across this country. And you simply cannot talk about immigration policy and not factor in rural. That is just a fact. So we're going to be covering immigration policy on this podcast in the coming weeks and months, and not just conversations about what we're going to be talking about today, but also how immigration policies are impacting U.S. food supply, the impact on the ag workforce, as well as conversations that dive into the impact on rural health. And again, the workforce, because you cannot escape that, what is happening, the situation where the reductions in the H-1B workforce visas are concerned, which is very likely to exacerbate existing healthcare worker shortages, including rural physicians. And also, we're going to be talking about rural health, and not just on the workforce side, but in terms of patient care, because many people in this country, despite having legal status, are foregoing their health care because of fear, not because they've done anything wrong, mind you. So Like I said earlier, this is certainly not a light subject, and I do hope what I've shared with you at this opener has provided you with some context. And as you learn more about how these current events are impacting people, families, and communities in rural places, and in particular in Minnesota right now. So to help us talk about this and sort through many of the different aspects, I am really pleased to introduce you to our guest. And the first one you're going to hear from is Lynn Melling. And Lynn is the co-founder of 515 Productions and also happens to be an Emmy and Murrow Award-winning video storyteller. Now, Lynn is in Minnesota. She's a Minnesota resident, and she grew up in the small town of Melrose and recently traveled to her hometown to document what's happening there. Next, I am so pleased to be joined by Brian Depew, Executive Director of the Center for Rural Affairs. I promise you, you want to hear my conversation with Brian because he goes on, he talks about so many of the big picture issues, but he also talks about a different way possible where immigration policy is concerned and the impact on rural. So very insightful, as you can imagine. And then lastly, after a quick break, I'm joined by Betsy Froyland. Now, Betsy is a freelance reporter whose piece in the February 2nd edition of the Daily Yonder entitled "A Small Town Under ICE Occupation" provides truly a granular level detail about the impact of Operation Metro Surge in the city of Willmar, Minnesota, population around 21,000. Whew. So once again, we're glad you're here. And now I invite you to tune out that background noise because we know it's going to be there when our time together is over, and listen to my conversations with Lynn Melling, Brian Depew, and Betsy Froyland. Are you ready? I sure am. So let's just go. Hey, Lynn Melling, Emmy and Murrow Award-winning video storyteller and the co-founder of 515 Productions. Welcome to The Rural Impact. I mean it when I say we are so glad that you could join us. You are one of 3 guests who will share their really important insights about the inescapable impact of immigration policies on small towns and rural communities. Welcome again to the podcast.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for doing this really important work.
Well, thank you for your important work because I wanted to start with you. Again, I said you're one of 3. I want to start with you because you are from a town that has been directly impacted by ICE operations. And as it happens, you also have a unique skill, that's an understatement, to share the story of your place in a way that helps us go there with you. And I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk before we started recording today because as I share with you, I was born in Minnesota. I was born in St. Paul, Hennepin County. Most of my family, my dad's family, and many generations still live in those areas. And when I discovered in looking at that map app, is that the place you're going to talk to us about is less than an hour away from where many of my family members are. So let's start there. Talk a little bit about Melrose, Minnesota.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I grew up in Melrose. It's a town of about 3,600 people. It's in Stearns County, Minnesota, which is politically a conservative part of the state. It's a little bit of background. It is the sister city to Legden, Germany, because there are so many proud descendants of German immigrants living there. So there's a very big German cultural impact in Melrose. When I was graduating from high school in the late 90s, we saw an influx of people moving in from Mexico and Central America to work in mostly agriculture. Mm-hmm. There's a Jennie-O turkey processing plant in Melrose, a lot of agriculture jobs. So, and here we are 30 years later, that community has continued to grow. And it's now very prominent. You walk down Main Street and there's Latino-owned businesses. They're very much part of the fabric of this community now. So, yeah, that's a little bit about Melrose.
Yeah, and I just find it interesting because, I spent most of my summers as a child in very, very rural Minnesota. And you're right, the immigration is not a new business in Minnesota. I mean, for my family from Germany. So what compelled you? I mean, you're not that far away, but what compelled you to go back and capture the conversations? What's happening? Because as we're going to talk about more in this episode today, we're going to hear, I don't want to give it away right now, but we're going to be talking about the fact that it can be so easy to, kind of pull the lens away and say, this is only happening in major cities. I happen to be outside west of the city of Chicago. And yet, man, oh man, I mean, we know the impact in the areas where the cornfields grow.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're from a small town, or if you grew up in a small town, you still live in a small town, you know how hard it is to speak up in a small town and go against the grain in a small town, because you go to the grocery store with these people, you go, to church, to school, to work with your neighbors. There's very little anonymity in a small town. And because I grew up there, I knew that, the surge was impacting Melrose, but we weren't hearing anything about it because people are afraid to talk about it. I now live in Minneapolis. My parents still live in Melrose. And it was the Monday after Alex Preddy was murdered. And I was sitting right here in this chair trying to figure out how can I use my resources in a strategic way to help tell this story, to help people understand what's happening here. And I decided my husband, he's a very talented videographer, and we packed up the truck and drove 90 minutes up the road to my hometown, knowing that because I grew up there, people hopefully would trust me more. They would open up to me more to tell their story, to maybe open up and share the story of what's happening there. And my unique situation is I can drive 90 minutes up the road, open my mouth, and if people don't like what I have to say, I get to drive 90 minutes back home. And if people don't like me for it, I probably will never even know it. So I just felt this responsibility to use my resources and my position to try to open up conversation in Melrose, and really more than anything, break the silence and get people talking about what's happening.
Well, and breaking the silence on camera and off camera is a bit of a different story, because you do mention that only a few people would talk to you on camera. We kind of talked about this earlier, the police chief and the pastor. Share more about the conversations that you can with us, protecting those who there's a reason why they don't want to be known. But that is a tough nut to crack, to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are many, many, many people in hiding in Melrose. There are many people who, they have their work permits. They are in the process of becoming legal citizens of this country. For those people not aware, Mexican immigrants in this country, it can take up to 20 years to become a legal resident of this country. So what do they do in the meantime, right? They have to work. And so, there's so much fear of these folks who are in hiding to share their story. They don't want to expose themselves and put them at risk. And then on the other side, there's people who want to speak up on behalf of these immigrants. So let's talk like the descendants of the German immigrants want to speak up on behalf of these folks, but it's a very divided community on the issue of immigration, and it's difficult to have difficult conversations and to speak up. And so I did not meet a single person or hear from a single person that was in support of the tactics that the current surge is using to intimidate people, to illegally detain people, there's the fear tactics, detaining children. Not a single person in Melrose that I spoke to is in support of that. But they are all afraid to speak up against it because, they don't want to create waves.
Yeah. And I feel privileged. Let me tell you that I can. I did have a friend of mine say, a colleague that I'm working with, say, aren't you, a little, any trepidation? And I said, absolutely not. I mean, it is, I think what we're talking about really is the impact of these policies on people's lives. And I'm interested for you to talk to us a little bit about your conversation with the sheriff.
Yeah.
That was so interesting to me. And wow, what
a great guy.
I say this often, courage is calling. Let's see who answers. Yeah. And it seemed to me that his ability to stand there and answer, talk to us about that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Police Chief Craig Mouse, what a great guy. I went to high school with him, full disclosure.
That helps.
And I have no idea if that, maybe made him feel more comfortable opening up. I believe that he would have the courage to speak to any reporter, any journalist that were to come to Melrose. I'm confident that he would have that courage. And truly, in this moment, you really understand who are the leaders of a community. And it is those who are willing to put themselves in front of a camera and talk about what's happening in a very calm way. So Chief Mouse, he kind of presented both sides. He said, yes, absolutely. There are people here who they knew they broke the law when they crossed the border. They didn't, have the proper documentation with them. And, they are here. They're trying to provide for their families. They are not being criminally problematic. So why are we dropping the hammer on these folks in such an over the top way? So his position was really like, sure, yes, there is an issue here. We need to figure it out, but let's do it in a responsible and reasonable way that doesn't disrupt our communities to the extent that it is.
I wonder if you got any sense. Over the weekend, I listened to, I think it's This American Life, but there was a feature called 911, What's Your Emergency? And as someone who's also paying attention, being in the health industry myself, I think about these strains, because again, if this was just happening in a bubble, and as horrible as some of the images that we have seen really is, we'll talk a little bit later with a guest who will reference another incident in Minnesota. But I think about the strains that it's putting on emergency response resources and things of that nature. Did you guys talk at all? Did you get a sense of how this might be impacting their capacity, if you will?
Actually, ironically, I don't know if ironically is the right word, but unfortunately, it's almost having the reverse impact that he's seeing. And he was, they're seeing a drop in calls of people who are reporting, crimes, automobile accidents, because they might be undocumented and they're afraid to call for help. And the Melrose Police Department's philosophy has been, we want to address things that are a clear and present danger to somebody's, safety in that moment, regardless of documentation. If somebody is in trouble and needs help, we want to help them. And they're seeing a drop in calls to 911, or at least that's the sense that I got. And I don't have the data to back it up, but that's what I understood from him when he was conveying that to me. So yeah, it's an interesting balance.
It is just a layer, if you will, of the implications of how policy can then the ripple effect of that. And I said it can lift people up, or in some cases really create some of the challenges and problems and hardships that we're hearing about today. And that's what our conversation is about. Lynn, before we close, tell us about the feedback you're hearing, since it's not like this huge documentary. It's just a few minutes. It takes like 5-6 minutes of your time, but it's a thinker, as they say. So maybe a few closing thoughts about how others can help to amplify the policies through storytelling, because we have to document these things. And independent journalism, which we're also going to talk about today, is very, very important in the connection with policy. What say you in terms of how we make sure that these stories are told and amplified? Yeah,
I have been absolutely blown away by the response to this video. I thought maybe 3 people would see it. I had no idea how far reaching it would go. It is now, here we are 3 days later, and it's been viewed on Facebook over 60,000 times. It's been shared almost 400 times. I am hearing from people all over the country telling me, thank you for doing the story, which to me tells me that people are hungry for information that is presented in a calm and reasonable way. People are looking for common ground, and they are not getting it because there's so much chaos. Journalists are trying to put out fires left and right. There's not a lot of resources laying around to just go tell a story that is kind of zooming out of the problem. So I think that's where, storytelling can be really helpful. I think it needs to be done really thoughtfully, really carefully, because there is a risk, if not done in a really careful way, that it can backfire. It can do more harm than good. But I think when done correctly and with empathy and with context, it can present to opposing viewpoints, here's our common ground, right? Like, we can disagree on things, but we also have a lot in common, and let's start there. We are in chaos. How do we stop the chaos? Let's find some common ground and just start talking to each other.
I agree. Absolutely. Well, oh my gosh. Well, listen, I'm going to put an invitation. I know we have to say goodbye to Lynn, but Lynn, I have to say what a pleasure it's been to talk with you, and we'll be following your work, and we'll put a link to your YouTube video on our website, and then folks can be able to see it there if they can't find you elsewhere. But don't go anywhere, because we've got more of this dot connecting conversation coming right back at you. We have so much more to talk about. We'll be right back. Well, Brian Depew, Executive Director at the Center for Rural Affairs, welcome to The Rural Impact. We are really fortunate to have you join us this morning. I know you've got a busy day ahead.
Glad to be here.
All right, folks, we are talking today on our episode. All the conversations are focused on the impact of immigration policies, and specifically those connected with federal immigration actions and how they affect small towns and rural communities. And I was compelled to invite you on the show, Brian, for many reasons. One of those being that I read your February 2nd blog posted on the Center for Rural Affairs website, wherein you state, and if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to read one of your many lines that you wrote, sentences you wrote. It can be easy for rural residents and rural policymakers to write off the news streaming out of Minneapolis as something happening elsewhere. While the headlines have emanated from large urban areas, dig deeper, and it becomes clear that federal agents are active in rural areas too. I'm from Minnesota, Brian. So I have family in rural Minnesota, and they have been communicating with me about what's happening. So I want to start there. Share more about what you wrote about with our listeners about immigration actions in rural areas nationwide. And then kind of go down your list of citations, the examples that you wrote, because if people are not paying attention, we want them to. They don't understand how wide scale this is and the impact.
Yeah, I think that was true even for me. Our home office, Center for Rural Affairs, is in Lyons, Nebraska, town of 800 people in northeast Nebraska. And that's where I live and work every day. And I watched the ramp up in enforcement action start in Minneapolis, in the news, and in Chicago before that, and in Los Angeles before that. Mm-hmm. And it did seem like largely an urban story at first to me, even though I was paying attention. But I started to notice more and more news stories about enforcement actions in rural areas and small cities. And it really kind of just all crystallized and hit me last weekend when I saw the video and the imagery out of St. Peter, Minnesota. And it's one of the places I wrote about in the piece where ICE agents were active in St. Peter, Minnesota. And a local woman was observing from a public roadway, and she was taking video, and they recklessly pulled her over, and 3 agents jumped out of the car, all with their guns aimed right at the driver who was taking video. And this is in a town of 12,000 people in southwest Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And is just one of several examples, but it was some of the most aggressive behavior captured on video that I think it's the first time I'd seen imagery like that out of such a small town. And I know St. Peter. I drive through there on occasion. It's a rural community in Minnesota. So that got me thinking more about it, and it's why I wrote the piece. But we have other examples as well in the piece. There was a surge of federal immigration agents into largely rural Maine. Yeah. And I saw a map of all the places in Maine where there had been immigration actions and extensive interviews with folks out of Lewiston, Maine, which is, I think, 37,000 people, talking about how most people that had been targeted were legal asylum seekers and other folks with legal status. Mm-hmm. And then the other example that I lifted up in the piece was a small city, Springfield, Ohio, been in the news for a long time, of course.
Yes.
But they're really on edge in Springfield, Ohio. And that's just a town of 58,000 people with 15,000 Haitian immigrants who, again, are legally present in the country. And they're on their toes because there's rumors and threats that that's going to be the next area that the federal government surges into for enforcement action.
Yeah, Brian. So our listeners, we are recording this on the 5th of February, and this will drop, you're hearing this the following week. And there was a stay. I don't have all the technical details, but there was a stay from action to, just basically wipe the map of these Haitians who are here with legal status. And as you write, it's 25% of the local population that have revitalized that local economy. And to your point, they have been in the news before for all the wrong reasons. And so let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing aside from the initial trauma. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, I was in Nebraska. I was in Grand Island, Nebraska over the summer, as well as Kearney, Nebraska. And this was in June when enforcement actions just started happening. And we were seeing in real time farm workers being, taken from the fields that they were working in. And I was stunned at that image back in the summer. So let's talk a little bit about the impact on small towns, maybe the not so obvious, aside from the initial trauma that people are witnessing. What are you seeing? What's your sense? I know that you wrote a little bit about what the Farmers Union had to say at a press conference. Maybe you can shed some light where that is concerned.
Sure. So in the piece I wrote about the press conference that the Minnesota Farmers Union had, where the Minnesota Farmers Union president was lifting up again the pretty extensive action statewide in Minnesota and the impact that it has had, particularly on agricultural manufacturing, agricultural processing facilities that oftentimes have new immigrant workforces, and how they were experiencing a shortage of workers. And again, just people are afraid to go to work regardless of their legal immigration status. And I think that's the thing to really stress, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're just staying home because they're afraid of getting caught up in this dragnet approach to enforcement. But it's not just agriculture. New immigrants make up a really large portion of the workforce in construction, in rural communities, in service industry, and they're small business owners as well in many of our communities. So the breadth of the impact across our economies in small communities and rural America from immigration has been really significant, and the impact of these enforcement actions that have people scared to go to work is really significant as well.
Yeah, and we're talking also about our healthcare workforce as well, and we're also looking at what's happening to children and the impeding them from being able to be educated. Before I go on, I just want to say I have read, and I've been writing a lot about this. I have read so many, I'm just going to say it, quite ignorant comments on social media about, hey, this is what people voted for. And I wonder if you could just, off the top of your head, because think about how you would respond to those who think, well, this is what rural America wanted. In fact, that is not the case. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, because you are focused on the bigger picture of rural.
Yeah, I mean, I live and work in these communities every day, and I see how new immigrants are welcome in these communities. Mm-hmm. They're running businesses, they're vital workforce, and the public opinion polling shows as well, both on the more positive side. There's been for a long time, strong bipartisan support for positive immigration reform in this country. Mm-hmm. That's been the case for many years, decades at this point. And then simultaneously in the new public opinion polling, I think we're seeing pretty roundly across demographics and across political persuasions, people saying that they think the current enforcement actions go much too far in how they're being conducted.
Mm. All right. So we know what the challenges are, and we know what we're seeing before our eyes, but what we can't see is the future. I wish we had a crystal ball and we could, but you do write about a different way as possible. So because we like to focus on the things that we can do here on this podcast as well, talk more about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, for 20 years, we've needed immigration reform. There's been broad bipartisan consensus of that among the public. And at times, there's been broad bipartisan consensus among policymakers. It wasn't that long ago that we had, a gang of 6 or a gang of 8 in the Senate, a bipartisan gang trying to craft comprehensive immigration reform. And that needs to include expanded legal pathways for people to come to the United States, to become part of our communities, and expanded pathways for people to become permanent residents and citizens. These folks, they're deeply embedded in our communities in many ways already. And the current situation is untenable, and it's on our mind a lot. But I wanted to remind folks that a different way and a better way is possible. These are policy decisions. Yeah. We can make different decisions as a nation, and we really don't have any choice. We have to make different decisions as we move forward.
You're right. And it is a policy decision. And one of the things that's been so frustrating to me is that there is policy in place for legal pathways, and those policies have been largely kind of ignored or snuffed out of the picture. And that's so frustrating to me because people are working through the legal pathways. All right. Because again, we are looking to connect the dots between policy and rural quality of life, Brian. So share with us, if you could, a kind of a call to action, because, sitting at our keyboards, frustrated and screaming into the void isn't going to help us. So talking about comprehensive immigration reform, especially touching on those decades-long failure that you talk about, what can we all do to advocate for that policy? What needs to happen now? Because we can't change the past. Today is the present. The gift we have perhaps going forward is that we can control this future. What say you?
We still live in a democracy, and I still fundamentally believe, people need to be engaged with their policymakers, need to call the U.S. senators, they need to call their House members, let them know how they feel about what's happening now, but also let them know that they support comprehensive immigration reform. It can feel challenging in moments like this to be heard or challenged whether you're being heard. But we also know that public pressure is the only thing that moves Congress. And we have many examples of public pressure moving Congress at the end of the day.
Yes, and constructively. I mean, I just want to put that out there. I mean, screaming and yelling and all that, we have to do it constructively. And at the end of the day, I think logic hopefully can win. All right, so folks can learn more about your work. I'd love to have you come back and talk to us about other issues, because it's not the only thing you're focused on, to be sure. How can they follow you and learn more about your work, Brian?
Yeah, you can look us up online, Center for Rural Affairs, CFRA.org. Find our website, and you can find other ways to follow us from there. Sign up for our newsletter, find links to our social media. But just look us up, Center for Rural Affairs.
All right.
Love to have you.
Great. We'll make sure that we put those resources and your blog on our website. Brian, we bid you adieu, but for the rest of you, stay with us because we'll be back with more Rural Impact conversation.
The Rural Impact is on the rise. Thousands of subscribers and listeners, hundreds of downloads per episode, a growing community of influencers united by a shared commitment to lifting rural communities. We focus on sound policies that improve quality of life for more than 60 million people who call rural America home. This is your invitation to be part of the rural movement, because your involvement can help shape real progress and lasting success. Explore our partnership opportunities and discover how we help expand your rural reach while sharing your rural impact. Visit theruralimpact.com to download our partner prospectus.
Or email partnerships@theruralimpact.com to schedule a time to talk with us.
Are you ready? Let's go.
Hey, Betsy Froyland, welcome to the Rural Impact. Your reporting is so essential. We've had a few conversations today, but I'm really glad to have this conversation because, as I said, your reporting is so essential, especially now. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, as I mentioned in our opener to folks, you wrote a piece that was featured in the Daily Yonder on February 2nd. And in my view, it's a must read for everyone in America, no matter what your zip code, for many reasons. But earlier in the conversation, we heard from Mr. Brian Depew, Executive Director at the Center for Rural Affairs, and he shared his very unique perspective on how easy it has been for rural residents and rural policymakers, for that matter, to write off the news streaming out of Minneapolis as something that's happening somewhere else. And he also shared a few examples from a high-level view, but your reporting provides us with details that really do demonstrate the profound impact of current immigration policies and enforcement policies on people working to live, as I say, in rural places, just working to survive. So, Betsy, let's start there. Tell us some background about your piece. How did you arrive at writing about a place called Willmar, Minnesota?
Yeah, so thank you for that background and that context. So Willmar, Minnesota is a very diverse rural community. You can see it, just by walking around their downtown area. There are all kinds of different restaurants and grocery stores, which is a bit unique, for a town of about 21,000 people. So it's a town that's very much enriched by the immigrant communities that live there, as specifically immigrants with Somali and Latino descent. And these are people who have lived in Willmar for decades. People have been moving to Willmar throughout the 20th century. a lot for the same reason that people immigrated there a long time ago from Norway and Sweden to find work opportunities and to make a life for themselves and their families in Wilmer. So it's been this immigrant community for a very long time. And the residents I talked to were very proud of that fact. It was very much a part of the community identity for them. In the piece I wrote, there was, a picture of this mural that had different crock pots, which is a Midwestern classic thing.
Yes, I know. Bring some to share. Yeah, we used to call it when I was a kid hot dish because I'm from Minnesota.
Yeah, the cultural divide.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
There's this mural in the downtown area that has different crock pots with the different flags of different identities that people have there. So it's very much a point of pride, the diversity in the community. And, we've been seeing in the past few months that the federal administration views it very differently. With the ICE campaign in Minnesota that we've been seeing over the past few months, the coverage has mostly focused on Minneapolis and St. Paul, which are certainly hot spots. But, the metro surge is also affecting areas not in the metro, as I've seen in Wilmer. There are these small towns with diverse communities, and ICE is certainly spreading out to those places. So I wanted to, with this piece, focus on one of those communities and highlight, both the diversity and then also the fear and the violence that ICE has brought to it.
Yeah. And you did so well because, it's easy to just think, hear a name of a community and then move on, but then to meet the people and talk with them and sit with them and hear them and literally listen to their stories. So let's talk about some of the people you met, some of the conversations you had and what you gleaned from those conversations so that people can humanize and put that into context of this unfolding, very unfortunate situation that so many people find themselves forced into?
Yeah. So I went to Wilmer a couple weeks ago, and I met with about 15 residents who had been impacted by ICE and what they were doing in their community. It was really a broad range of different kinds of residents. There were parents, children, high school students, business owners, but all people who had lived in Wilmer for a long time, had deep roots there, some who had lived there their entire lives. Mm-hmm. And everyone I met, everyone around the table had been impacted by the ICE siege in some sort of way. Some people had witnessed ICE arrest their neighbors, seen it firsthand. Some people had experienced ICE brutalizing them and terrorizing them themselves. And some people, had just been living in fear of ICE coming to their home or to their place of work, or just finding them out in the community. And I want to clarify here that these are not just people who are undocumented folks.
Yes.
There are definitely some of those, but even people who were legally in the country, even U.S. citizens, expressed that they were afraid of ICE because, recently they have just been stopping anyone who looks to them to be Black or brown. So there was one young woman I talked to, she was about 18 years old, a U.S. citizen who had lived in Wilmer her entire life. And she was violently dragged out of her car by ICE and followed to her home by ICE on multiple occasions. So, this is something that is affecting even U.S. citizens.
In so many ways. In so many ways, aside from just being you have the pain personally inflicted upon you, just the mental anguish of watching that's happening. Betsy, this is something where, I am having these conversations and I will absolutely steer clear of anyone who wants to shift the conversation to me to the what about, because that's not where I go. We really take a look at policy and the impact on quality of life. And in earlier conversations, we talked about there being a different way. But I want you to share with us what you learned about the impact on the financial aspect of this, the financial hardship that this is causing, and that on children and working parents and local businesses, because this is not a faceless problem. These are real people's lives who are being subjected to some pretty stunning interruptions.
Yeah. So when I went to Wilmer, we were actually meeting in a restaurant that had closed its doors to the public. It was, the middle of a day on a Saturday, and usually it would be bustling with lunch business, but we were the only ones in the restaurant because it had closed its doors about 3 weeks ago due to ice. And this is not the only business in Willmar that had been doing this. There were many businesses, restaurants, grocery stores, who had closed their doors because employees were afraid to come in, or regular patrons weren't coming in because they were, nervous about what ICE might do. So, a lot of people around the table expressed that their businesses were struggling. And on top of that, you mentioned children. I learned that a lot of children have been missing school because of this. A resident who works with kids said that some kids have been expressing that they're afraid that their parents will be taken by ICE, or they're afraid that they'll be taken by ICE while they're walking to or from school. So there's an enormous, economic toll on the community, but also, the toll of kids missing schoolwork and this immense psychological impact that everyone will be dealing with for a long time to come.
Yeah.
And one more thing I'll share is just this. One resident pointed out the irony of all of this, that the rhetoric from the Trump administration is that this is making America greater, bigger, and better. But, the residents reported to me that that's exactly the opposite of what's happening in their community. It's making them poorer and smaller and just more afraid.
Yeah. And I would also point out the connection, because that's what we do here, is connect the dots. I would also point out the connection to how this impedes health. How are we healthier when the prevailing feeling is terror and fear and the mental anguish and the images that people can't unsee and the noises that they can't unhear? I think that's also really important for us to bear out in the conversations that we're having in the future. And I thank you for bringing it to our present so that it's a kind of a launch pad for us to have these courageous conversations, because our previous guest talked about the fact that she could hardly find but a few people to talk to her on camera for fear of any kind of retribution. Did you find that to be the case? It seemed like you were able to gather a good group of people. And are there concerns there with the speaking out that you could pick up on your own?
Certainly. Yeah, definitely. People were afraid. Some people didn't want their names shared publicly, but I think alongside that fear, there was also an immense desire among the people in Willmar that I talked to have their story told. So I think people still wanted to share out about what was happening, but that was something that was coexisting with the fear that they felt, because I think everyone's afraid of retribution right now.
But there are enough people who are mobilizing, organizing, advocating. In one paragraph, some sub-paragraph of your piece says it starts like this. So let's talk before we close out about the community and what they're doing to stay connected, insights on how they're managing their resources, because we've also talked about how this, kind of stretches the capacity of local resources to respond to concerns, threats, 911 calls and so forth. So what's their way forward, if that's the right way to put it?
Yeah. The people of Willmar, I will tell you, are definitely not just sitting back and watching this unfold. Everyone around the table that I talked to had been stepping up in some sort of way to help their neighbors through this difficult time. And I think, in a rural community, something unique about it is that there are those small town connections, and people are already, the people who have been arrested are classmates, are, friends of people. So there are those, grassroots connections that already exist, but people are mobilizing in a lot of different ways. People talked about doing grocery runs and giving rides to neighbors who are afraid to leave their homes. People are protesting. Kids have walked out of school. People are just keeping watch of the streets for ICE, wearing whistles like they're doing in the cities as well, to alert their neighbors when ICE is around, and, ready to record any ICE arrests on their phone. And also, picking up the pieces after neighbors are arrested. So, returning belongings and finding family members, and, figuring out care for children and pets. So if there has to be, a silver lining in all of this, the community is definitely coming together in some pretty amazing and beautiful ways. And it's an incredibly resilient community in Willmar, for sure.
Well, I hope that your story reaches those who are policy is only exists because of our policymakers who design them for us and enact them for us. So at this point, I do hope that those who have the influence to change the policy to make sure that we're more and more any community, let alone rural communities, are not impacted in such a way. Because again, as you so aptly point out in your piece, it's not just one thing. There are layers and layers and layers of complexity to this. And without the silver lining of neighbors helping neighbors, the rest of it is pretty unnerving.
For sure.
All right. Before we let you go, I would be remiss again. I tell folks we're recording on February 5th. You're going to hear this 1 week later. And of course, I think it's important for us to talk about the importance of independent journalism accessible to those living and working in small towns and rural areas. This piece that you wrote appeared in the Daily Yonder. I reference it often. In this point in time, reporters like you and accounts like yours are so important. So talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on why it's so important to support the work of independent journalists working in the rural space where others dare not to go, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think in the news and media space, it's just information overload right now. And what I've been finding really rewarding about this kind of independent journalism, specifically in a rural space, is that it's so rooted in the people. Independent journalists like at outlets like the Daily Yonder and others that are doing similar work are actually going out and talking to people whose voices aren't normally heard about the policies that are affecting them in rural places. So I do think for those reasons, the work that's rooted in people is really important right now.
Yeah, thanks for that. The story is about them told by you versus you. and that makes a difference to me. So Betsy, thank you so much. We're going to make sure that we put links on our website to this story and other work. Where can folks follow you if they want to?
My work is published in the Daily Yonder and another outlet called Barn Raiser. So you can follow me there. Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. For the rest of you, thank you to Betsy again for joining us. This has been quite many courageous conversations today. Stay with us. We'll be back with some closing thoughts. We'll be right back. Once again, my thanks to Brian Depew for his unique insights and also to Lynn Melling and Betsy Froyland for really helping us to better understand the stories of those experiencing immigration enforcement actions on the ground and in real time. Now, before I leave you today, I want to share with you one more thing, because as you heard me say at the top of the show, I am not in the studio because I am in our nation's capital, and I am capturing rural voices at both the National Association of Community Health Centers Policy and Issues Forum, as well as the National Rural Health Association's Policy Institute. One of the conversations I had today was with a woman named Mary Zalesny. Mary is the CEO of Finger Lakes Community Health, which is a community health center, or also known as a federally qualified health center, that provides care to about 28,000 patients per year. And of those 28,000 patients, about 23% are farm workers, as well as farmers. So recall that I also shared we're going to be focused on connecting many more dots with respect to how immigration policies are impacting rural, including what this means for the delivery of care to patients. Now, Mary shared the following with me on the subject, and now I'm going to share it with you as well, because I believe it's within our collective best interest to understand the ripple effect in both human terms and the implications for rural economies. So Mary shared the following. Community health centers will care for anyone who comes through their doors. Our goal is to keep people connected to primary care so that they can get help early, before small problems turn into serious illness. When people feel unsafe or afraid to leave home or work, they often put off care. That can lead to avoidable trips to the hospital, higher medical bills, missed work, and much more stress for the families. It hurts patients. It also increases costs for the whole healthcare system, because primary care is much less expensive than emergency or hospital care. You cannot poke a hole in that story. So my thanks to Mary for spending some time with me today. And just one more thing, just a few moments ago, I'm going to try and get some video as a part of our YouTube feature. I had the thrill of a lifetime to witness a very small group, although they're in numbers all over this country on their walk, a very inspiring group of venerable monks and their Walk for Peace, which, if you've been following, is a 2,300-mile community-supported walk that encourages non-harm, kindness, and mindful living. Something to think about in the context of today's conversation. I thank all of you for joining us again for an episode of The Real Impact, and to Sarah Garvin for her incredible creative and editing genius, and to Bria Corsaro for all she does for the show behind the scenes. I thank you both. I invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram. And until the next time we're together, I remind you over and over, please take the best care of yourself and, to the best of your ability, all those around you. We will see you soon on a new episode of The Real Impact.